Welcome to the Production Talk podcast with me, Jan of mixartist.com.au. In this podcast series, we celebrate the modern way of producing music. We want to talk about all things related to songwriting, recording at home, and music production. So if you produce your music at home, this is the place to be. Please subscribe and recommend this podcast to all your friends. This is the Production Talk podcast, episode 48. Welcome to another episode of the Production Talk podcast. At the beginning of this episode, as always, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the country that we are meeting on today, the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Blessed love. With me today is Heather Bonnefond. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for having me at your place here. How are you today?
Thank you for coming, Jan.
It's great to have you. Look, Heather, we had your partner, Jim, on this podcast before. So I'm sure that the regular listeners probably know episode 18 with your partner, Jim. How is Jim going these days?
He's in San Francisco at the moment, having 5 or 6 weeks in the States with friends and family. So we get to catch up with everybody.
Excellent, excellent. So it gives us some time to, speak about you and your career.
So he doesn't steal my limelight. That's why I sent him away to the States.
Well.
He's a hard one to compete with.
Well, but he's also a very humble person. So
yes, he is.
Yeah, excellent. So you two are a couple of two sound professionals.
Yes, we are.
Is this how you met through your work?
We met, yes, we actually met through a friend, but then we met as I was managing a studio and Jim came in as a client and the previous client was running over. And so Jim had to wait in my office while he was waiting to go into the studio. So that's kind of how we met, but we had met through a mutual friend as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you literally met in the studio, basically.
We did meet in the studio.
How telling. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe give us a bit of a broader overview of your career in audio.
Okay. Well, I came to Sydney and from Victoria, and I was working in advertising at the time. But I was dating a guitarist and he was going to join Air Supply.
Okay.
And it's a difficult story to tell, so I'll try and be brief.
That's okay.
So I was working in advertising and I was working as an assistant producer, and we used to do Levi's, Qantas, Helena Rubinstein and Coke commercials. And one of my jobs was to go into a studio to time the jingles, make sure they were 58 seconds, 28 seconds for the fade out. So I went into the studio and I was just besotted. And it was a studio called United Sound in Glebe. And it was above a film studio where Bruce Beresford, who wasn't very well known then, but he did Hanging Rock, Picnic at Hanging Rock, and there was a whole film studio underneath. So I had gone up there to time these jingles, and a couple of weeks later, I left my job. I then went to Perth with the young man I was dating and was speaking to one of their sound. He was playing in a band and I was speaking to the sound guy, and I said, I'd really like to do this. And it so happened that he had an argument with his girlfriend and took off down the street and said, could you mind the console?
Oh, you're right.
Big mistake. Somehow I turned front of house off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Big mistake. The guys from Richie Blackmore's Rainbow had come over, the crew had come over to the club, and they were having a drink, watching me do this, did not know what I was doing, but he said, just, move the faders a little bit, so I turned front of house off somehow. And the guys were laughing, sitting behind me, and they said, do you know what you're doing? I said, absolutely not. And they said, let me show you some things. So that was my introduction.
Oh, wow.
I then got a job with a band over there and did front of house for probably a year and a half, Still didn't really know what I was doing, just finding my way, but so were they.
And what year would that have been, roughly?
That was around 70...
Roughly?
76.
Oh, I would have been 1 year old. I was born in 75.
Thank you so much for that.
Sorry, I don't mean to rub this in, but wow, those were the things you were doing while I was literally
but I got
diapers.
to live through the 70s, live through the 70s, and you didn't. Well, you did, but you were a baby.
I envy you. Here's so many great things. The 70s musically, what a decade.
It was amazing. So, because we used to drive across the Nullarbor Plain in the truck and 3 other vehicles, and we would drive across to Perth and drive back.
Wow.
So it was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That was a really good time. So when I got back to Sydney, I decided to go back to the studio that I had gone to check the timing for the jingles for the advertising agency I worked for. And there was a guy there at the time called Spencer Lee, and he was a pretty outrageous character, had worked for Pink Floyd in the UK years before. Very innovative and creative, and he was willing to take a little bit of a chance on me. So he said, my assistant is gone for 2 weeks holiday, so you can come here, you can do 2 weeks, but I'm not paying you. And at the end of the 2 weeks, you're done. He said, but it'll give you a little bit of experience to see if you like this kind of work. So my interview lasted for 12 hours because he wanted to see if what I was like with balancing sound. And they had an API console. So it was an amazing studio.
Wow.
And then, so after the interview, I did my 2 weeks, and I was in my 20s by this time. I'm like 23, and I would be sitting sewing seagrass matting together and making coffee and just doing everything, and coming from a job in advertising where I was getting really good money. But I loved this job. I just loved it. So the Friday night came. He didn't say anything. This was the end of my 2 weeks. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. And I turned up again on Monday. Just sort of take a chance. Right. And he basically said, if you hadn't have turned up, I would have been disappointed, even though I'd said just 2 weeks. So I was there for quite a few years, and that's how I got started.
But then you got paid from that Monday onwards?
But I used to get $1 an hour. I used to work 80 hours a week.
Oh, ouch. Wow. That's a rough start. Yeah.
So I ended up having to say to him, look, I can't live. And I was still doing live sound. So at nighttime, I'd work in the studio and I'd start in the Cross with some of the bands that were working in the Cross at that time. There was a lot of amazing bands. That was the place to hear music in the 70s. So this time it's like 78. So I started working at United Sound around 1978. Definitely that year, actually. So then I would leave the studio and go straight to clubs in the Cross and work till 3 or 4 in the morning.
Wow. And
then have a few hours sleep, be back in the studio. And
crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. It was pretty crazy. So, yeah, that's where my start came from.
And how long did it take until your workload eased a bit, until you got into more of a sustainable, workload?
About 20 years.
Oh, no. I was hoping you said a year or two. Really? Crazy.
No, it was pretty crazy then. And, as you start something, and I think particularly it was different for me because I was a female and I had to prove myself.
Yeah.
And so I kind of I felt like I had to push myself even more just to prove myself. Because a lot of guys, there was another girl, I had done a little bit of research to make sure that some of the facts that I might be telling you were true. There was another woman who had started Albert's at the time called Karen Hewitt. She started at the same year as I did, but we didn't really know much of each other because she had gone to Melbourne and then started to work for Stock, Aikman and Waterman, who wrote Kylie Minogue songs, and Rick Astley, Donna Summer, people like that. So she had gone, and I was the female who was doing commercial music engineering. So,
and just to give us a rough idea, we all know the 70s was a very different time, and well, at least what I know these days, which is mainly from TV shows and so on, was somewhat chauvinistic. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, and it was.
Yeah.
But I have to say that there were a few incidences where people were uncomfortable having a female in the studio.
Yeah.
But all in all, my experience was actually really good.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you have to deal with certain things, and I think you have to be, as a female working in a more male-dominated industry, you have to deal with certain things and tolerate certain things. And it was harder then. You know, I remember I had tracked all the Mental as Anything.
Yep.
I didn't mix it, but I recorded all of Mental as Anything's album. And I remember at the time they didn't want to give me the credit as engineer.
And why would that be?
Because it was not looked at as being, they wanted a male. So it didn't give them authenticity they felt, I think. So I got recorded by, and I was Heather Dalton then, I got the credit recorded by after my boss fought with them and went, no, you can't do this. So there was that, and there was a few incidences. There's things you have to a lot of things you have to turn a blind eye to and not get offended by.
Yep.
And I probably would not be like that now. I would probably have maybe clearer boundaries because I could. But at that time, I knew I was coming into an industry where they just weren't used to having women in the studio at all.
Just give us a rough idea. How many women were professional sound engineers around that time?
None. There was Karen Hewitt in Melbourne, and there was myself in Sydney.
So you're saying you were among the first two female sound engineers in Australia that we know of?
There may have been others, odds and ends, but actually doing albums and working, you know, like with more high-level groups and bands, there was really Karen and I.
Okay.
And we really didn't know anything of each other. And it wasn't until I did the research. I knew of her, but I didn't know where she had gone, and she probably didn't know of me, because Melbourne and Sydney, it's a very different scene.
Yes. Yeah,
very different.
Okay. All right. And let's just keep going with your career. You know, that was sort of in the 70s. And what happened in the decades after? How did you grow as a professional? What other challenges did you
I went freelance about probably 78. I probably went freelance around 1981, and that was mainly because I had a baby as well. So I was working at EMI. I worked freelance as an engineer, but I also worked in studios as a manager or a co-manager. So I was doing both. So I managed Paradise Studios for a year, but at nighttime I worked at Sony recording.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I often used to take my son with me. So there was a lot of to and fro, and I was very lucky because I felt like I was well accepted in the industry. And if I can say something, I think I was, because I was open.
Okay.
I was open to, I think I created a fairly good vibe in the studio. I understood that. I understood it was their space. I understood that there's 5 people that are here and you're trying to get the best out of them. So it was a lot of counselling at times, a lot of relationship counselling. And that turned out well. I mean, I can remember a situation where I was doing a heavy metal band, and the guitarist had this huge fight with his girlfriend and really couldn't perform. And they had limited time. They were paying, I think, $250 an hour, and that was a lot of money then. So just because I was a female, I was able to say, let's go and have a chat. And he was able to share things to me that he may not have shared with other people, and, you know, and settle him down to a place where he could then start playing again.
Oh, wow.
So the balance I felt was good. And I wasn't a girly kind of person. And I loved it. I mean, I loved my life. And I worked too hard.
Obviously. Yeah.
I worked too hard. Yeah.
So do I understand you correctly that, you know, managing a recording session, that to you it's not just aiming the microphones and setting the gain right and that's it. It's actually way past that and, you know, really dealing with the people more than the sound engineering aspect. Do I read that correctly?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you expand on that? What difference does it make if you also bring in the personal element into a recording session?
I guess I see the job, yes, you've got to have the technical expertise. You've got to be able to operate the equipment. You have to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But if you know how to operate the equipment, but the people in the studio don't feel comfortable, you're not going to be able to get the best performance out of them.
Mm.
So I always felt like that the other part of my job was kind of probably nearly equal to how well I knew the equipment and how I could record. I have to say, I probably wasn't the best recording engineer around. I definitely wasn't. Let's change that. Can we scrap that? Just say, I definitely wasn't. But I was able to work with people and they liked that. So I had a situation once where a fairly well-known engineer on a high-budget album got fired. And I got a call at 3:00 in the morning to say, if you can come into Paradise and pull a good guitar sound, you've got this gig. And it was a good one. And I realized that the person who was the engineer, very well known, even internationally, the reason that they let him go was because they wanted to do a guitar. They wanted it, it was a heavy metal band. They wanted the control room to be louder than what he was monitoring. And I understand that as an engineer who was trying to protect his ears as well. But you've got to try and find a compromise. Mm-hmm. And I had this thing where I used to put a D12 in front of the amp and a 58, 57 sometimes, or a Neumann, what we had, and put them out of phase. And it was like this, I was able to make this great guitar sound.
Yeah, right. With D12, that's a kick drum microphone.
It's a kick drum.
Yeah, right. Wow.
But Spencer had taught me this, and it was a great sound. Mm. And I knew it was what they needed.
Yeah.
And so they weren't happy that I was a female, but they liked what I did. They liked that I was open, and I got the gig at 3:00 in the morning.
Excellent.
So we did the whole album. I did a lot of counselling. They weren't keen on the fact that I was a female because they had an image to uphold. But eventually we finished the album and they loved it. So I felt like it wasn't necessarily that I was a great engineer, but I definitely was able to work with them.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's about protocol. It's about knowing you're stepping into their space.
Yes.
You're stepping into their space, and what do you want from this? What do you want for them?
Mm.
And for me, it was like, you just keep going over that guitar solo. You've got it, buddy. It's good, but let's do another one. I can hit, yeah, that's good. We're going to keep that one, but I know you've got another one. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. And it's just having that, sitting with them and being with them. And because they want the best thing. And then, but later on you say, actually, the first one you did is the best one. I've still got that one. So we use that one.
Okay. Yeah. And when you say, you kept the takes, that was probably a bit different than it is today on computers. You were working to analog tape.
Yes.
So when you wanted to keep a take and still record another one, you needed another track?
Yes, we did. You didn't have a lot of choice, but I mean, you had to do what you did, to get the job done. You had to, but that's part of it as well, being able to go, he's going to like this one. He's just a bit lost, or she's just a bit lost at the moment.
Yep.
Because you keep doing it and doing it and doing it. So let's keep some of these ones and then see how they go. Quite often they would choose one of the first ones.
Yeah, that's my experience as well, that often the first takes are actually the better ones. And, not much good things, in my opinion, happen after take 5 or 6 and so on. It just gets... I find that people get too head heavy. They think too much and don't feel enough anymore when they repeat themselves too often.
I agree. And I think they think, it can't. The first one, I can't have done it. Let's have another go.
Okay, good. And you worked in studios a lot. How beneficial was it in the studio to have all your live sound knowledge? Was that something that you could translate to studio work? Was it beneficial to you, or was that like a completely different domain that was sort
the
of
live
not really,
work?
Yeah.
Oh, I think I was quite fast in the control room because doing live, you have to be spontaneous. You have to be really fast.
Yeah.
So I didn't waste a lot of time.
And that's really good when the clock's ticking in a studio. Yes.
I mean, when I started learning, of course, I loved live sound as much as I like studio sound.
No preference. You like them equally well?
Not really.
Yeah,
I like the spontaneity and the creativity of getting that straight away live, but then wasn't that keen about the limitations. But I love that, seeing if you could capture that. And they're coming out straight away, and you're trying to mix and get sounds. And in those days, we had to do front of house and monitors.
Yes, of course.
So we're trying to, when you start, you're young, and the band's young. You're trying to get all the fallback happening, all the front of house happening on song one, because you don't have the opportunity to do it beforehand.
There was no sound check time?
Not a lot of time.
Not a lot. Okay. Well, wow. I've done that with front of house, make the first song the sound check. But with foldback, that's an entirely new story, because if you're in the middle of the audience, you have no idea what they hear on stage.
Exactly.
You can't hear what they hear. So how do you practically do that? Is that signing with the musicians?
No, just listening. Just listening to what they're listening to, trying to do it as you go along.
Yep.
And when you work with the same band, you get to know. Yeah. If you're doing a tour, you get to know where their levels are at. You get to know the songs.
Yep.
So it becomes easier. Some of the harder things were stepping into a gig. So I was doing a gig. We were doing a support gig, and it was Noiseworks, who used to be called The Change, and they were supporting My Sex. And we did the sound check, and I could see that the crew from My Sex just were not keen having a female touch their equipment.
Really?
So we did our sound check, but they had changed all the compressors, and they had done a lot of not very pleasant things. So I had to pretend.
Were they actually sabotaging you?
Oh, yeah. They were.
What?
So I had to pull the female card and pretend that I didn't know how all the equipment worked, and ask the guys if they could show me how some of the equipment worked, so I could get the compressors and I could get the equalizers the way. So I kind of came across like, I don't really know how these things work. Would you mind showing me? Okay. So they started showing me compressors, and they went, oh, well, you can leave them on. I said, can I just change this a little bit? And he was like, yeah. So our band came on. I started changing everything. And the guy turned around to me, the guy who's doing front of house, said, you conned us, didn't you? And I said, absolutely. This is the band. My job is to do the best job I can for the band.
Wow.
And he was like, wow.
You navigated that situation really well then. You didn't seek any confrontation. That probably wouldn't have, worked to confront him.
No, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, wow.
And they were the guys who called me the chick sound guy. I love that name, the chick sound guy.
Crazy times. Well, we've come a long way. What advice would you have for girls and women today who want to start in the professional sound world?
I think that I have for me, it was like, I just have this thought that it doesn't matter whether you're 15, 50, black, white, female, male. If people like working with you and they like what you do, they employ you. Might be idealistic, but that's how I feel. And I did push through in a time when women weren't accepted, but I never had an attitude like, I'd never had the attitude, well, you poor me. I loved what I did, and I just liked that situation with the live gig. I did what it took, and I tried to respect people on the way. And I just really didn't have a lot of problem, Jan.
That's
really
great to hear. Yeah, good. Well, that's fantastic advice. So you basically, you managed to beat those people with your sound, with your skill.
Yes.
And prove your point that way.
Yes. And if that's what it took to do that, my job was to do the best I could for the band that I was working with.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do that with how they had turned all the compressors down for front of house and they changed everything. I knew it wasn't going to work. And that would also reflect badly on the band firstly, but also on me.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. What was the biggest highlight of your professional sound career? one most amazing moment?
I end up doing front of house for, oh gosh, this is hard.
I'm putting you on the spot
The ones
here.
that would impress people are different from the ones that I loved.
Talk about the ones you loved.
I loved working for a gentleman by the name of Doug Parkinson, and I worked with him on and off. I was his tour manager as well on a few tours, but I just loved the musicianship. Tommy Emmanuel, who's a wonderful guitar player who has international acclaim at over the last few years, was in the band, and his brother, and some amazing musicians. And I think personally, because I loved what they were doing, I just loved working in that band and with them, and was treated with so much respect. I did end up doing front of house for Johnny Cash, so accidentally.
Wow. Tell me the story. I love Johnny Cash.
Well, we had gone up there.
idol.
We were working as a support band, but I had just had a baby. So I was still breastfeeding. And so I had said to the guy who was doing the support band, I'll do the gig, but I've got a baby, so you need to accommodate for that. So we went up there, and it was at Rockhampton. And they were doing it outside. I think it was like an auditorium oval. It was like a big oval, and so they had scaffolding built up. And so front of house used to be down the back, right up on the top of the scaffolding. And so I ended up, we did the sound check. I never actually saw Johnny Cash. His auntie was there, and I had a baby. And so I was up to climb up all the scaffolding to get up to the tower. And we did the sound check, came back, we did the gig, and found out that Johnny Cash's front of house person had got himself, let's say, sick
Okay.
from the night before and wasn't operating too well. And because I'd sat there for their sound check, one of the guys said to me, can you take over? He's not going to be able to do this. Would you be able to do this? So I said yes. So they never knew really that I never met Johnny Cash. They never knew that I did front of house for the concert. But their sound guy was sitting behind me. I couldn't really talk to him because he wasn't really conscious.
Oh, wow.
So that was pretty amazing. Yeah, I mean, I ended up working with a lot of different bands. Yeah, I think the Doug Parkinson thing was the big thing for me because I just admired who he was.
Okay.
And you could name drop other people, but for me personally, I loved it.
Wow. Okay.
So,
and can we talk about sort of like the later years of your career? Can you talk about a couple of projects that you did sort of recently?
Recently? Well, I haven't done a lot recently. The last thing that I did was I worked in New York as an audiovisual technician before we moved here back to Australia. And a friend of mine had asked me if I wanted to work in corporate. Now, I kind of gave up a lot of doing a lot of sound because I went more to admin stuff, and I was looking after some songwriters and an artist. So I kind of went more into management as well because I had two children by this time, Jan.
Yeah.
And that, as much as I loved that lifestyle and loved what I did, it was getting a bit too difficult for me.
Understandable, yeah.
So I ended up managing a singer and a couple of songwriters. And I used to go to Mid-Em for one of them, and it was in France, the song. So anyway, I did that. I became a tour manager, and I did a tour with a band called Dallas County Line, who not many people heard of, but...
Yeah, I have not.
No.
Tell us about them, please.
Oh, that was interesting. Dallas County Line was... the singer was a gentleman who had a company in the United States called Health South. He had 8 private jets, Gulfstream jets.
Oh, wow.
And he liked singing country music. So a friend of mine who was an agent said to me, would you like to do this tour? I said, look, I can't at the moment. He said, name your price. So I did. And I did this tour. So we had our own private jet, Gulfstream. Ray Leadbeater was the pilot.
Whoa.
And we toured. We did Tamworth Country Music Festival, but we did They were actually trying the first in-ear monitoring system.
What year was that?
That was in
Roughly.
about 91, round about 91. So they wanted to try an in-ear monitoring system and just tour around.
That was a really fresh or young technology at that time.
Yeah, it
Probably
was.
with lots of problems.
Yeah.
How did that go?
It was fine, actually. I was really the tour manager on that job and flight coordinator. So, yeah, I was lucky to have a lot of different opportunities to do different things in the music industry. And I looked after Todd Hunter and his wife Joanna Piggott, who wrote Age of Reason for John Farnham. So they also had a studio. He's from Dragon, band Dragon. He wrote a lot of the songs for Dragon. So they had a studio in Bondi Road called Bondi Road. So I used to work in their studio. They would do 8-track demos because that's how they wanted to do it. And they would send them up to the studio and I would work them and then take the songs to publishers. And at one stage they did a song called Only You. And a friend of mine, who was a songwriter, said there's a young man called Keith Urban. She said he's 19, that he's looking for a song. He was with ABC Records. He was with The Ranch then. His band was called The Ranch. So I listened to the song and I thought, okay, I wanted for him to be able to hear his voice on it. Because it was sung, I think Joanna sang it herself. And I thought, he's young, he may not be able to hear that. So I got a guy by the name of Rick Price, who's a very well-known musician here. And I knew if he heard Rick's voice, he would take the song. So Rick did the demo and it was sent to Keith and he took it on. So that was his first, I think that was his first single, but I'm not 100% sure. So yeah, so I used to do some song, well, they call song plugging. So I used to try and find artists to match with songs. So they used to send me to the United States and over to France to Mid-Am. The publishers would send me there just to learn about how I could connect them with other writers. And so I worked with 2 songwriters. So the lady that I also was her assistant, she had written for Tina Arena, Rick Price, and Keith Urban. She's now living in Nashville. And so Jim and I had a publishing company called Song Shop Publishing together. And so that was my publishing experience and world. So I was able to mix a lot of things. I was able to be a tour manager, manage studios, do front of house. I was able to, in my career, to change, and that's what I like to do. And after a while, I would just change it to something else. And it worked for me.
And it probably gave you a more holistic picture. It
Absolutely.
probably helps quite a lot, even if you're a studio engineer, to know the publishing steps.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really good. Okay.
But my last thing was I got a job at JP Morgan Chase Incorporate, which...
JP Morgan?
Yes. So I was in my 50s.
That's different.
It was very different. And I thought it was not going to be... I was thinking it was a little bank and I was just setting up a laptop and a screen. And the building that I was working in was 50 floors and there was 30 technicians, AV technicians, in the one building. So what had happened was that they did a lot of corporate events. So, for example, if they were the major sponsors for like the US Open. So if Serena Williams won, then we would have a big event presenting her with the check.
In that building.
In that building.
Yeah.
We had the 50th floor was a full 360 view pretty much of Manhattan, and they had a control room there. They had 3 or 4 control rooms in the building. So they used to do a lot of events. So, but my issue was when I got the job, I was 56 and I hadn't done really hardly any digital work. Most of mine was analog. And I'd done no video.
Okay, that's a rough transition then.
It was really rough.
Yeah.
But I told them, I said, can you operate a Polycom? No. And I was thinking to myself, I just want to save my friend's job who'd referred me, because this is way out of my league. And they ended up giving me the job, and it was a great job. I loved it. The team were amazing, and I love working as a team member. And in fact, one of the things I'd like to say was I loved being an assistant.
Okay.
I loved being in that position where I could help you do the best job that you could do. So as an assistant engineer, I was really good, to the point where all the clients that came in, I had a little book and I'd write down what they had for tea and coffee. As soon as they got there, even if it was 2 years later, hopefully they didn't want to change from coffee to tea, I would have the stuff. I could anticipate the needs of the engineer. And I really did love being an assistant engineer.
Fantastic. Wow. So that seems to be, I hope I'm not wrong with that, but, it seems to be like, the common theme of your career, that you were always really good with people and, made them feel comfortable and sort of, help others.
I hope so, yeah.
That's really the vibe I'm getting. And, I think that's phenomenal. That's definitely something that I'm taking out of this conversation today, that it's really all about giving value to others.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good.
And in turn, I got that. I got that value.
It's also rewarding, isn't it? For oneself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done it for so long had it not been rewarding.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the transition from analog to digital? So you were basically right there at the breaking points. That must have been very uncomfortable,
Well, I kind of stepped away around about that time.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. It's I stepped away and went more in, because I had children. I went more into admin, went more into tour managing, publishing. So then coming back to it was really hard.
I can imagine. So the industry moved on. There's, new technologies, and then the things that you knew may not work anymore.
It didn't, but it actually didn't. Thank goodness my husband is who he is.
Yeah, of course.
And it actually didn't take me as long as I thought it would.
Yeah, of course.
But doing video was much more difficult for me.
Can imagine.
But most of my job, I ended up being what they call an A2. And an A2 is someone that's in the room doing the directing. So we would have like 400 or 500-inch screens drop down from the ceiling. We were doing webcasting. We were sending this out to maybe 140 countries. We would have a lot of high-level people there. So I would be in the room directing, like calling the shots for the control room, for the video operator and audio.
Okay. You probably need a set of nerves for that.
You couldn't make a mistake.
Yeah, right. And I guess your live sound skills probably came in really handy there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the great thing about doing this work, there are lots of other opportunities that you can go into. Yeah. And corporate was not something I thought I would do. And I have to be honest, I really liked it.
That's interesting.
Yes. I think I liked it. I really like the challenge, this completely new environment.
Yeah, of course. That's a big change, yeah.
It was a big change. And one of the things they asked me on the interview was, I comfortable working with high-level people? I said yes, I guess because I did feel comfortable, because I didn't think that those people were really any different to anybody else.
That's right. Yeah.
Just no different.
They're just another person. Yeah.
The only trouble is if you're working with someone like Tony Blair and he's got a $5,000 tie on you and you're trying to lav him up and you clip the back of the tie and you tear that back of his $5,000 tie.
Oops.
But, yeah.
So that happened?
Not for me. But Tony Blair was one of the chairmen of the bank and he came in. And so we used to work with Bill Gates and people like that on their meetings. And none of the guys wanted to take the job on because they were like, no, it's too heavy. So, yeah, it was, I guess I love the pressure.
Yeah, I can see that.
I love the pressure, the challenge of new things.
Okay.
So, but you're right, my life experience of having children, being a regular mum, being on the road with maybe 12 guys, sustaining my integrity of who I was as a person as well and as a female, and not getting bruised by a lot of situations or insulted. You have to have a little bit of a tough skin.
Yeah, of course.
To go through it.
Imagine.
But I did have a great mix of a lot of different things, and I'm really grateful for that.
Mm.
And that all culminated in me being more mature, but being able to step into a very high-level, high-pressure job at a 56.
That's impressive, yeah.
Yeah, and learn a new skill.
Yeah. And succeed at it.
Yeah, and it was great. I mean, I actually really loved it. I was surprised because I'm a team person.
Yeah, right.
There was 27 men and 3 women on this AV team. And some of these guys had worked like with Michael Jackson, with a lot of high-level people, and they had got a little bit older and went, and they weren't that old.
Yeah, right.
But they just wanted to go, I just want to be at home. I want to have a stable job. I'm kind of done with the touring. I'm done with all that kind of pressure. And I just want to live in Manhattan. I just want to be in my hometown.
Yeah.
So the 3 women, the guys used to call us Team Estrogen. One of the women was an electrician on The View, I think it was, with Whoopi Goldberg. So that we were just this mix of 3 I think we were amazing women because we all loved each other and we got on really well, and the guys were incredible and never were intimidated because we got such high-level jobs.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So geographically speaking, your career sort of bounced between Australia, Sydney, the East Coast, and also the United States.
Yes.
So you've moved forward and back more than once? Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah. Probably twice, really.
Were you born in the United States?
No.
No, you were born in Australia.
I was born in Australia.
Okay.
Jim was born in the United States.
I see.
But we met. We met in Sydney.
You met in Sydney.
And then we moved to Nashville.
To Nashville?
Yeah.
And then also from there to New York, or was there...
From Nashville back to here.
Okay.
Where Jim worked at SAE.
Yeah.
And then we moved to New York. Sorry, I'm a little vague because it's like we went back and forwards a couple of times.
Yeah, I'm just...
So, and then we moved back to Australia 8 years ago.
I would assume there are probably quite significant cultural difference in the way people interact and, conduct themselves or, run projects. What are the most common stereotypes about Australians and Americans that you've found, if there are any?
I have to be honest and say that I think Americans are not as ageist as Australians are. And I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but I found that actually that's kind of not true. Let me take that all back.
Okay.
In New York, New York was a much more open place to accept people who were female, older, and I probably might not have got as well accepted doing the same job in Australia. I just don't think I would have gotten in.
Okay.
But then again, in Nashville, when we moved to Nashville, I was going to go back into the music industry. That was in 96, yes. They were not comfortable with women working in the music industry at all. It's very much the old boys club then.
Yeah, right.
It was very difficult, and I would have had to start all over again.
Do you still have ties to those places these days?
Yes.
And do you know by any chance if that's still the case, or has there been change?
No, I definitely think there's been change in Nashville. Definitely.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, there's a lot more women working in the industry on the technical side, audio, video, everything. The world has had to open up to that, to women doing what they do. I think sometimes the balance, just that energetic balance in studios and in environment, if there's all males, to have a female is a good thing. And I think women, Jeff Beck said once that women think in stereo and men think in mono.
Okay, well, please explain that.
I don't know if I can. I think.
What does that mean to you?
I think that women can multitask a little easier.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah,
I can relate to that. Yep.
Multitask a little easier. And that's sometimes not a great thing, but I think that's how we're made. And I think that's what he was trying to say. And he loved he had shared with me once when he came to Australia that he loved working with women in a studio. He loved that. It wasn't just having a female. He loved the energy of working with other women.
Okay, yeah.
Because he said just having all that testosterone for months on end, he couldn't handle. But the balance of that female energy that brings into an environment is really good.
I've experienced that myself as well.
Have you?
I definitely prefer about a balance, 50-50 balance. It seems to be the most productive balance in my opinion. I have to say that as a male, I can only speak for myself, but I'm absolutely terrible at multitasking. Every time I try, I mess things up. So I'm really good at just focusing on one thing at a time. But multitasking, in all honesty,
I think also women are, they can pick up certain nuances because I think we're made to be able to, because if we have children, your child might come up to you and be chatting and you might see a stranger to the side. A mum peripherally will be able to pick that stranger who might not make her feel comfortable, where a dad will still be centered on this conversation like you and I are having. A woman will be picking up other little things around.
The surroundings, yeah.
The surroundings, because that's kind of how we're supposed to be. And I think that works in the studio and creatively in this environment as well, because we're able to, this guy's not doing great today. Where you might go, he's just not singing. He's just off today.
Yep.
We might be able to pick up, he's not doing well. What's going on?
You've met a lot of musicians and artists in your life, and some became quite successful, but I'm sure there were plenty among who also did not make it or did not cut it in the industry eventually. Is that right to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Over the years, have you noticed certain similarities or certain common traits that the ones who do succeed, that they share? Is there anything that you could point your finger on? I know that's a difficult question, but what comes to your mind?
It's a combination, Jan. I think you have to have the passion first.
Yeah.
Because the passion gives the drive.
Yeah.
I will just use an example, and I will use Keith. I had taken a writer to meet with Keith, a songwriter, and he lived in this tiny room. We had to step into the room to close the door so we could close the door behind. And there was 2 songwriters that he was writing with. And he was having a shower in this tiny little bathroom. We were all sitting crunched up on this bed just waiting for him to come. He was just Keith Urban in the branch. He was just a muso in Australia and hadn't had hardly any success at that time. And as we closed the door to come in, I looked at the back of the door and it said 6 o'clock, run, 7 till 9, practice. And that was his outline. And I can remember saying to this other writer, this guy's going to be really successful one day.
Yeah, right, because he had a routine.
He was serious.
He was serious.
He was serious.
Yeah, right.
He had a routine and he was driven and he loved what he did.
So what you took from it is that he wasn't just drifting through the day randomly. He was structured. Yeah. And
he wasn't waiting for it to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in Nashville for around 9 or 10 years just sleeping on people's floors before he had any success. So he certainly has paid his dues.
Yeah.
But that thing on the back of the door, I still can see it. Right now I can still see it in my head, the list. And I thought, yeah, this guy's serious. But with that, there was also humility and a genuineness, and he was present, and a love of his music, love of what he did. So I think for me, that was the thing I went, yeah, this guy's going to do really well. And I think that is I'm not really sure. I think it's different for everybody.
Yeah, of course.
But I think passion and drive, but I think the passion gives you the drive.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes you've got to have a bit of a business head.
Yes.
Unfortunately,
that's right.
one of the things in managing I used to often see is that musicians were great creatively, but often used to make not so good decisions.
Yes, I think, you and I and probably all the listeners, we probably all know another musician who's very, very talented, but couldn't get a gig in the, hall next door if their life depended on it, who just stick to their room and never break out of it.
Right.
And, talent by itself and musical skill, that doesn't seem to be all of it. There is more. And, it's the interaction with people and getting things done.
And look at the musicians who are not great. They're not amazing, but they have lifted themselves up to these great heights because maybe they came from a media background or a business background or something. So they just knew this. They knew how to drive this engine to where they wanted it.
Mm.
I mean, because I've had other businesses, sometimes I've said to people, do yourself a business plan. Well, why? It's a business plan. I said, let's not call it a business plan. Let's make it a life plan. Start from the end, like they do in a business plan, and say, what would you like to see yourself? Where would you like to see yourself?
Yep.
And because managing artists, if they don't have a vision, you can't give it to them. They have to have a vision, and then your job as a manager is to help them move towards that vision. But if they don't have it, can't give it.
Yep. Oh, that is so true. That is some gold advice. Thank you so much. That is really good. I love that. We're sort of, approaching the end. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. But, as we sort of approach, the end of this interview, give me some listening advice. What are the most amazing musical records that you've come across lately? Can you give us any tips? Anybody who you really recommend? Maybe somebody who you produced in the past, or maybe some new music? A bit of both?
I have a bit of a real mixed bag of music.
Good.
So I really like from a band called the Petersons to Kaleo. I love a lot of, I am older, that's obvious, but I'm just so excited about music at the moment and where it goes. Like I saw a movie last night called What Women Want. It's a crazy Australian movie. But the music on it was incredible. So I took pictures of the Phantoms. They're a great band. There's so much amazing music, Jan. It just blows me away.
Yeah. It's a great time to be alive musically.
Yeah. It really is. I saw an amazing guy down at Lennox the other day. He was Brazilian. And he was like doing sampling, and he was like playing everything. It was incredible. I'm like, look what has happened. I think COVID has also created a lot of this. People are stuck at home, have been, and have had to really create.
Rethink,
they've had to create something for themselves. So, I like a lot of different kinds of music. I try and not stay. I love a lot of older style, but I really like new stuff.
Good.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great mix to have.
Yeah.
Heather, thank you so much for, inviting me to your home for this interview.
You're welcome.
And sharing all this amazing wisdom and these phenomenal stories. That's really great and really insightful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that.
It's been lovely. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Thank you. This was Heather Bonnefond on the Production Talk podcast. Thank you so much, Heather. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I really wish all our listeners could have seen you in action when you speak. There is just this aura of wisdom and joy for music around you, and that is just amazing to see. So thanks again for sharing all of this with us. It's quite an inspiring life story that you shared with us. And I'd like to encourage more women to join the audio industry. It is definitely a place where we need you. And I really hope that this might be just a tiny pinch of encouragement for all the women who are considering a career in audio. If that's you and you're unsure, please feel free to reach out to me for advice, help, contacts, whatever I can do to help. I definitely support your case, and I really hope that we finally will make it to parity in the industry. Why not? Okay, if you want to reach out to me, you can reach me via my website, mixartist.com.au. That's the place where I offer mixed-on services and help people getting their projects to the finish line. Just recently, I had my very first client from New York, so big shout out to Tom. It was a pleasure working with you. That was good fun. If you want to contact me, you can do that even if it's just for a quick chat. That's no problem at all. Right there in your podcast application is a subscribe button. Please hit that button and also recommend this podcast series to all your friends. Give us a rating, give us a 5-star review. That would really make the world of a difference to me. Thank you very much for listening. And that's all for today. Bye for now.